I'm sorry, I can only see the first Aparna slide. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Really delighted to be chairing this session on play. Sorry, I can only see the first Aparna slide. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for that minor hiccup. It's a real pleasure to be chairing this session this afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Placements are very close to my heart as placement lead at Leeds Beckett University. So we've got a really interesting session. I'm really looking forward to it. Just a bit of housekeeping. I think most people are very used to the system by now, but on the platform, we've got the questions tab, so please only put questions in there. The chat tab, which is only for comments, please. And we haven't got a Q&A as part of the session, but hopefully the speakers will be able to go back after the session and answer any questions. So thanks so much, everybody. So our first session is kicking off with Dr. Aparna Ramandrakan, who's going to talk about placements in schools. So over to you.
Thank you, Jo. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. The work that I will be presenting today on enhancing school-based placements for speech and language therapy students was funded by NHS England and carried out with an absolutely fantastic team at University of Lincoln. As you'd all agree, I'm sure Jo would agree as well, placements really are the backbone of our academic programs. They play such a crucial role in shaping future clinicians and subsequently impacts everything related to service delivery. So today, I'll share what we've learned about how school-based placements can be successfully implemented from a scoping review and qualitative research that we carried out. So this would include a summary of the current school-based placement models offered, including supervision models, success factors, and barriers, and some recommendations which can be used to either develop school-based placements or expand current provisions. Okay, so it wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody here that we're facing some challenges in speech and language therapy services in general. So whilst there are many, there are two themes that I think is relevant to this piece of work, which I want to highlight. So the first one is relating to waiting lists. So as of January 2025, over 66,000 children and young people in England were on waiting lists for speech and language therapy care or interventions. Nearly 21,000 have been waiting for more than 18 weeks, and some have waited over a year. So really staggering sort of stats. And these delays are particularly concerning in early childhood, where timely intervention is critical for language development, literacy development, and social development. Workforce shortages sort of compound this problem, with vacancy rates sometimes exceeding 25% in some regions. The second theme is relating to the need for more placement opportunities for our students. So traditional placement models which currently exist cannot keep pace with the growing number of speech and language therapy students and rising service demand. So this sort of bottleneck risks undermining student preparedness and workforce sustainability as a consequence. Schools-based placements offer a scalable alternative to target both of these issues, so essentially two birds with one stone. International evidence shows that there are models which have been piloted elsewhere in the world which have shown to improve access and student readiness. Without innovation, delays will continue to widen health and educational inequalities. So understanding and reforming school-based placement models is not just optional at this point, we think it's essential. So our project had four main aims. First was to map the current landscape of school-based speech and language therapy placements. So what models are currently being used and how they are structured. The second was to explore stakeholder perspectives on placement experiences and needs. The third was to identify the main barriers and enablers. So these are sort of the practical challenges and success factors that influence whether placements work well and can be scaled. Finally, to develop evidence-informed recommendations. So these, we viewed them as actionable steps to improve and expand school-based placements in a way that supports both student learning as well as service delivery. Right, okay, so we began with the scoping review to understand the existing evidence. So the review adhered to the PRISMA scoping review guidelines and the Arksy and O'Malley framework. The review protocol was registered with the Open Science Framework. We included studies which specifically explored speech and language therapy placements in school context. So that could be any context, so it could be community-based, independent practitioner-led models, anything really. We extracted data relating to supervision models, placement structures, barriers, and enablers. A narrative synthesis of all studies was performed and structured sort of around the review's objectives. And this gave us a strong foundation for the next phases of the study. Okay, so moving on to the details relating to the qualitative study. So we ran 4 focus groups. The first one with practice educators, the second one with placement leads at HEIs, the third involving professional representatives, so representatives from the RCSLT. This was mainly so we could get a more wider policy level sort of perspective, and finally involving students. The recruitment strategy was quite broad. We used networks involving educational institutions, NHS trusts, the RCSLT as well, who disseminated the call for participation, and we used social media. We used online focus groups to collect data. Thematic analysis was used to identify key themes and sub-themes. Okay, so with the boring bits finished, let's now actually go to what the study found. Overall, we mapped the current landscape of school-based SLT placements using the evidence from the review as well as the qualitative study. And we sort of identified 4 key themes, for lack of a better word. So the first was relating to placement models and structures. And here we found a real mix of approaches in use. So these included traditional NHS placements, university-led models where academic staff supervise students in schools, project-based placements focused on delivering targeted interventions in schools, and also emerging telehealth sort of models designed to overcome geographical barriers. We'll get to that in a bit. So each model did bring unique benefits, but participants generally highlighted challenges around scalability and consistency. The second is relating to supervision. So again, the supervision models varied quite widely. So direct supervision was still common, but our research did show that long-arm supervision, so this is where students get periodic sort of check-ins rather than constant oversight from supervisors, was increasingly being used to manage capacity. Peer supervision also came up as a valuable support mechanism, helping students to learn collaboratively and share their experiences. Okay, so the third was relating to outcomes and impact. So feedback on outcomes was often informal, gathered from students, practice educators, teachers, and service users. So participants mentioned that while they had plenty of anecdotal evidence which suggested positive experiences and skill development in students in particular, as well as from service users, systematic evaluation and data relating to that is still limited. So this does highlight the need for more robust evaluation, so we can really understand the impact that school-based placements would have on all stakeholders, really. So finally, moving to international models. So we reviewed international evidence as part of the scoping review and found that several models, particularly the Broken Hill model in Australia, provide a strong evidence base showing that embedding students in schools can improve access and continuity of care. So there are several valuable lessons to be learned from these international models and several practical ways of adapting these models to the UK context. Right, so what did our research tell us about the challenges of implementing school-based placements? One of the most dominant themes was relating to geography. So our research showed that rural and coastal schools are generally harder to reach. Not really surprising. So limited transport options did mean less time on site, more sort of planning headaches for everyone involved. It also meant that schools in rural and coastal areas were unlikely to be considered for school-based placements, which does highlight a clear sort of inequality. Parental consent did come up occasionally. So some participants mentioned that when parents don't give consent, there's simply nothing that you can do. This did limit therapy opportunities, even when student-led sessions might be the only timely route to support for that particular child. Expectations from the students was another recurring theme. So schools sometimes expected students to function like qualified speech and language therapists. So our findings did highlight the need to clearly explain, particularly to the schools, what students can do, why they're here, what their learning outcomes are, and what the role of the supervisor then is. Admin and logistics was described as a barrier, so coordinating schedules, arranging access to school systems did take quite a bit of time and did delay essentially the start of placements. Caseload complexity was a recurring point as well, and something that was interesting. So our research showed that caseloads sort of need to match up with the supervision model that they're going for. So under indirect or the more long-arm sort of supervision, simpler, I don't know how to phrase this, but more predictable sort of cases worked best. And when it came to more complex caseloads, direct supervision with very structured oversight was definitely recommended. Some legal and policy constraints were also featured in our data. So some participants noted that, some rules like restrictions on joint working with therapy assistants, say, for instance, who are really critical, who play such a crucial part in therapy, in providing interventions, can limit practical learning opportunities for students and make supervision less flexible. Preparation gaps were also commonly featured. Practice educators did suggest that students often arrived sort of underprepared for school workflows. So things like classroom observation, documentation from a school context, and so on. So some practice educators also identified the need for more specific or streamlined supervisory training for practice educators to ensure that students are well supported, especially when the context is a bit more autonomous. Financial considerations was another theme. Hosting placements cost time, resources, etc. So if the school doesn't see a clear benefit, engagement and scalability options were limited. Finally, again, no surprise, workload pressures did come up. High demand, staff shortages did reduce capacity for supervision, reflective practice and feedback, basically all of the things that make placements safe and high quality. Okay, so moving on to more positive news. So, these are the success factors that were highlighted through our research. One of the strongest themes was timing. So participants consistently pointed to the spring term as the optimal point in the school year for placements. So by then, the schools have probably settled into routines, which did make integration smoother and sessions more consistent. Now, another enabler was early access to technology and resources, particularly for the students. So providing laptops, secure system access, did allow students to document independently. It supported long arm supervision. It did make coordination easier. We also heard a lot about relationships. So strong trust-based partnerships with schools did ease logistics, helped with consent processes, allowed co-design of activities that fit the school priorities. Closely linked to that was leadership engagement. When school leaders understood the scope of speech and language therapy and student roles, it underpinned practical things like timetabling, space allocation, and did ensure longer term commitment, thereby leading to sustainability. Communication and coordination were described as critical, so more clarity in roles, learning outcomes, supervision plans, the more successful the placements were. Flexibility as a theme came through in two ways. So the first was relating to adaptable supervision models, so blending direct, indirect, and peer supervision, almost tailoring support to student capability and case complexity. The second was relating to flexible service models itself. So, for instance, like having buy-in arrangements did ensure that students had sort of a regular presence in schools, giving them exposure to full intervention cycles, which students did indicate as very beneficial. Finally, participants emphasized autonomy with oversight as a success factor. So graduated responsibilities, planning, delivering, and reflecting with clear boundaries built confidence, clinical reasoning, and readiness for practice amongst SLT students. So where do we go from here? Right, so here are a few recommendations which outline a pathway for implementing school-based placements. We've sort of grouped them into short-term, medium-term, and long-term integration. So moving from sort of immediate steps to sustainable change. So in the short term, the focus should be on building a strong foundation. So start by choosing the right placement and supervision model for the context, schedule placement at times that align well with school routines, ensure pre-placement preparation is thorough so students in schools and practice educators know what to expect. Establish strong partnerships between schools and universities to initiate implementation. So these actions are practical and can be achieved quickly to set the stage for success. Medium-term strategies aim to strengthen capacity and coordination. So scale supervision capacity to support a growing number of students effectively, developing centralized training programs for all stakeholders, the practice educators, school staff, students, and so on. Improve coordination among stakeholders to ensure smooth communication and shared goals. Long-term integration focuses on embedding these changes almost into the system, so incorporating these models into national SLT education strategies for lasting impact and developing robust systems for evaluation and quality assurance, including objective measures of impact on all stakeholders. So this will ensure sustainability and continuous improvement well into the future. Right, so we did develop a roadmap which illustrates how these recommendations can be operationalized. I do apologize for the tiny font, but this is the biggest that I could make it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach by any means, but it's more like a structured pathway that allows for adaptation based on local contexts. So collaboration and phased implementation really are the key to success. By following this sort of a phased approach, it becomes possible to move from quick wins to long-term transformation, improving access and outcomes for children, as well as enhancing opportunities for experiential learning for our students. Okay, so a sincere thank you to all my colleagues who collaborated on this research, for all the expertise and commitment throughout the project. I want to express my gratitude to all the participants who generously shared their time and insights. A big thank you to NHS England for funding this work. And finally, thank you to all of you for listening.
Thank you so much, Aparna. Really interesting insights there to take forward, thinking about how placements can be successfully developed within schools. Thank you so much. So next up is Elizabeth. Presentation sounds really exciting, the kind of the sweet spot of knowledge and skill transfer. So over to you. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Hello, thank you, everyone. Greetings. I'm from Australia, Sydney, Australia, as you may be able to tell, and great to hear about the Broken Hill placement a little bit. I was actually involved in that in the setup, so I'm feeling a little bit at home, even though it's the middle of the night here in Australia. I'm representing a team today, and yeah, really excited to present with you. It is really important in Australia and New Zealand, where our researchers are from, that we acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands, and I do want to do that and pay my respect to their ancestors and descendants today. Sorry, I'm just moving it around so I can see the right things on my screen. So as you'd know, we definitely can't teach students everything we need to know. We rely on them taking things from the classroom and taking it into their placements, maybe taking stuff back from the placements into the classroom and sort of cycling through until hopefully into the future workplace. That transfer of knowledge and skills is actually so important that it's become an explicit requirement in Australian university accreditation. And I'm not sure about the UK, but it's certainly something that's topical here. There are lots of definitions. We use this fairly generic definition about essentially retrieving knowledge and skills learned in one place and using it in a different or dissimilar place. But the concept of transfer and how it occurs, and particularly in SLT, is something that's just not clearly understood in the literature. There's certainly pieces, and we've put a couple of pieces there in terms of recognising things about the past, learning that might be relevant to the new situation, pulling apart your knowledge, reconstructing it, talking about it seems to be a really key thing, and reflective practice. And the final study was one we did a couple of years ago, and we asked our students coming out of a simulated placement what they thought they would transfer. So that's just an insight from the student perspective, which is obviously really important. So I'm going to run you through two studies today, or two arms of kind of one big study. What we actually decided to do is ask the we call them practice educators or clinical supervisors, the people who work alongside the students in clinical practice, including in simulation. We firstly set out to ask the educators what they thought, what they felt they did actually to facilitate that transfer of knowledge and skills, and also what it looked like when they thought students were actually transferring their knowledge and skills. So how we did it was actually a Delphi methodology, which had 3 phases. We started with an online survey and asked educators those 2 questions and anything else. And then we went to focus groups to go to a bit more depth, and then we went back to online surveys and sought their agreement with a number of statements that we generated from the previous 2 phases. So in the previous 2 phases, we used content analysis to analyse all of that data. And you can see there too, it was international. It didn't include the UK. We were asking only countries that use Compass, which is our clinical assessment tool, and all had the language of Compass. So it was Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, I think, and one of the other ones escapes me right now. But we had 4 of the countries participate actually in the study. So I'm going to share the findings because it's a lot of data and we don't have a lot of time. I'm just going to blend together some of the work from the surveys and the focus groups, which I'll try and signal just so that I don't duplicate, because they did, of course, expand on each other. So firstly, in the surveys, what transfer looked like, we had 4 categories. The first one being metacognitive evidence. So this is not the showing, this is the thinking about it or talking about it. So the kind of growth that educators were saying they were seeing, it's about what they see in reflections, maybe the written reflections or perhaps the verbal discussions that they're facilitating with the student. Educators also talked about what they could see when students sort of started to talk about, oh, that's like, Mrs. Smith that I saw last week, or little Johnny, or whatever it was, making those connections from the past into the now, or perhaps into the future, talking about the why, and even being able to share their knowledge with their peers. The educators thought, well, if they could actually get to the meta level of being able to explain to someone else, and they really had transferred their knowledge and skills there. The second category, this is the doing category, if you like, where the practice educator sees a demonstration, not just talking about it. So it might just be in the plans that they're making ahead of a session, which could be for a similar setting or something more different. Could be the questions they're asking. It might be in the moment, the assessment or the intervention, whatever they're providing, really seeing that improvement based on feedback and their experiences and linking those together. And we had a lot of comments from the educators about that growth. They really recognise that if students have transferred, it really, then they were, of course, much more independent because they didn't need someone else to prompt them to do that. They were much more confident and they took initiative. And of course, some of those things are generally things that we'd probably think about in terms of competency, but in terms of transfer, what they were really talking about is the students being confident in contexts that they hadn't previously experienced, and they could sort of more independently apply it, to the next setting, taking the lead and not sort of leaning on the educator as much for support either during or after when they were reflecting on it. The other categories we had there was reliance on the system. So sometimes educators felt that it was actually them doing the clinical assessment was showing that. It seemed some of them relied on a label or a time point. It was, even they were saying things like, well, if they were sort of, going to a near graduate level placement and nothing, bad happened, then they must have transferred. So, had quite a broad concept, if you like. And we did also find educators that just wrote things like not sure, it was too hard, or, that wasn't something they'd think about. And that's really important for us to understand. It's not in everyone's repertoire as well. So I'm just going to go through the focus groups in terms of the educator strategies, because this is where we found the real richness in that. The practice educators did talk about a range of things that they did. One of them they talked about was their safe and supportive environment. So we're talking about things like setting up orientation and expectations, being comfortable to ask questions, feeling okay about making mistakes, those kinds of things. Not surprisingly, they talked about reflective practice. That is one bit in the literature we've seen, and asking the students to reflect was a real way, whether it was verbally or in written reflections, that they could link what's happened before to what's happening now and maybe to the future. They also did talk about things they did to help students, sort of make that bridge between what they maybe had in the classroom, assignments or whatever, and things like modelling things they talked about in that category as well. Educators definitely recognise that how they ask questions and how they provided feedback could impact that and could help the students really attend to the links, rather than just thinking whatever they were talking about was only related to that moment in time, or that person in time, the family, whatever they were dealing with there. They also talked about that it was cumulative and it takes time, and they recognised that them as an educator, they couldn't just sort of expect it to be an instant, they arrive and they get it. So maybe linking to the previous presentation about the school and how we sort of get students ready for each of those contexts. And they certainly talked a lot about what they see, but we've talked about that in the previous slide. So the other thing they talked about was the authentic workplace, and they said actually they felt that was important in terms of being able to see that students could really transfer their knowledge and skills. So I'm going to leave the educator study there. I'm sorry, it's a whirlwind tour, and because I really want to share some of the student perspective with you. The educator study, we've just finished the Delphi statement sort of going out for agreement, and we're just sort of analysing those final results now. So hopefully next time for that one. But the student perspective, and I'm imagining we've got mainly educators in the room, but hello to any students if you're here. We really wanted to identify what the students thought the educators were doing to support the transfer of their knowledge and what was beneficial, I guess, in that way. And also the students, their own lived experience of what they thought actually meant that they had transferred knowledge and skills. So same methodology. Here is the previous in terms of the 3 phases that we did, and again, multiple countries, but dominantly Australia in terms of the responses so far. We haven't done the phase 3 Delphi statements yet. So in terms of what the students told, what they saw the educators doing, you'll start to see some similarities here. So they talked about the placement environment and the opportunities. So they talked a lot actually about safe space. and how important that was to facilitate their transfer. They talked about educators, really tailoring experiences and expectations, providing resources, so really setting things up well for them. The students definitely talked a lot about, they noticed the educator feedback and reflection really could help them. It could have been something, after the session, debriefing, could have been questions in the moment, all the different ways that they can do it, but they talked about how that really had an impact there. The students also noticed that explicit teaching, whether it was modelling in the moment when something they couldn't do, or just questions to stimulate that deeper thinking or drawing back that knowledge that perhaps they hadn't activated yet. The students also recognised that it was important to talk about transfer, and they recognised that educators led some of those discussions. They might have asked them what have they done in past placements or studied at university, or talked about application to new clients, tried to help them again make the links and the parallels there. And sometimes they told us they couldn't see anything that the educator did, whether they were too busy, maybe educators just made assumptions. So again, it was really important for us to understand that it's quite a range in the student experience there. And I just wanted to give you a taste in the student words. So this is obviously relating to the environment. So one of the students said, facilitating that safe space where you feel like you're able to demonstrate your skills, where you're not afraid to make mistakes, because you know that your supervisor's got your back and wants you to learn from those mistakes. So I just love how they phrase things. So I just wanted to hear them today. Okay, so that was what educators did. So moving back to the survey again, then what did the students say that transfer looked like for them? And again, similar kinds of things. So they definitely noticed, with their client care, working with the patients, that they could apply and adapt to more complex clients or something that they hadn't done before. They talked about being more independent in that and not focused as much on themselves, and even noticed sometimes the client progress was a bit of an indicator that they were, kind of doing the right things, therefore they must have transferred something. They also talked about a growth in their general performance. They talked about that things were less effort, the cognitive load was reduced, or they needed less support. They felt they could sort of tackle some of the problem solving and sharing their knowledge with others again. It was an indicator that they'd been able to transfer their knowledge and skills. Students also told us that there was a range of sources. Obviously, they could self-reflect and sort of assess that they had been transferring and growth there. But they also talked about the importance of the educator, or having those sort of mid-placement, end-placement assessments, even things, comments from the client and family reinforce some of that as well. Students also recognised that something happened in terms of their thinking. Actually, they kind of did less thinking in a way, because things started to be more automatic. But they could also self-reflect and identify what knowledge and skills had been transferred. And they also mentioned a shift in their feelings and attitudes. So they were more natural or competent. They were less stressed. They didn't feel like they were scrambling or lost. And again, I'd like to share a quote from one of the students with you. The shift in feelings and attitudes, the less worry about performance. There's less, maybe not for everyone, but potentially there's less kind of attachment to the feedback as like reflective on who you are, and more just, okay, it's not actually about me. I just could have done this, that, or that better. I'll adjust that approach next time. There's just more ease to the vibe. Again, couldn't say it like them, but I love that. So when we combine these two perspectives, you would have gathered there's quite a lot of overlap. So the green being the overlapping bits there. This is our preliminary put together, because we're not quite finished the studies. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of common things in the middle there. Talking about it, reflective practice is obviously key, and important setup things like creating that safe space really does facilitate the students actually to have a go. And of course, each of the groups added something different. In terms, and particularly it was really interesting, not being a student for a long time myself, to really hear what it felt like kind of internally for them, because that's something we can obviously share with them, but I wouldn't have necessarily thought to do that if we didn't have the words and things from there. So that's been really great to hear those things. So from here, so we've been, we need to finish both the studies. So gathered, we were running them each independently. So they're both at a slightly different point. The educators, as I said, their Delphi statements, we're just analysing the agreement now. And we just got ethics through this week to run the student statements. So they're literally going out tomorrow. That's what we're doing. And so for that, student educators, I think it was 54 statements, the students at 60 statements, which have been generated completely separately, but it'll be really interesting, of course, at the end to bring them together and then see, see what's kind of consensus across the groups. And then for the future, we certainly need to understand what's critical in terms of transfer versus, I mean, some of these things you're probably thinking, well, this is just good educational practice, isn't it? And maybe it is, and maybe they sort of go hand in hand for educators and students, but, it'd be great to sort of understand if there are any kind of, again, critical things there and the distinctive bits of successful transfer as well. So I think that's all I need to share today. It's been really great, and really thank you for the opportunity to present to you. And hopefully we can get the next bits out next year. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. What a privilege to share, hear your findings at this stage, and just so interesting from a methodology perspective in terms of the Delphi approach, but also those findings. And I guess the metacognitive stuff it's always important to talk about, isn't it? At every level, it improves our teaching and our education, clinical education. So thank you so much. So our final presenter is Orla Duffy. So lovely to see you, Orla, and over to you with your framework around enhancing student support. Thank you.
Thank you. I nearly forgot I had to present. I was so involved in listening to the two presentations. They're so interesting. I can't wait to read more. So thank you. My name's Orla Duffy, and I am presenting on behalf of my colleague as well, Rosalind Rogers. We are both at Ulster University, based here in Northern Ireland. So really delighted to be sharing our work here today about our Navigate framework. And really this is I suppose the first time we're presenting on a framework that we've pulled together to support students on placement. It's about navigating adversity, value and inclusion, growing, achieving, thriving at Ulster. Also with acknowledgement to the regional partnership members, all of our placement educators in Northern Ireland, our students and graduates as well, in terms of helping us to improve standards along the way. So I am placement coordinator at Ulster University, and Rosalind Rogers is the programme lead at Ulster University as well, both of us lecturing on the team. So a little bit about ourselves at Ulster University and the placement context. We're an undergraduate degree over 3 years, and our placement model is a model of 4 block placements over 3 years. And we have a tripartite agreement with the trusts in our region in Northern Ireland that works very well in order for us to manage that placement capacity with the 5 trusts here. Our campus, which moved in the last 3 years, our university is a 3-campus university, is in the north of our region. It's the London Derry campus, and we've got 2 other campuses. We, like probably a lot of other HEIs, are experiencing a rising number of students from Ireland, based really on our recent workforce review, really to meet the demand of the profession and those waiting lists that are increasing. We have regular meetings with our partnership groups just to keep on track with needs and to review feedback on a regular basis. So a little bit of rationale about why we've come about to develop this framework. We, along with other HEIs, and not just in our own profession, there is increasing diversity in the profession that we welcome. This gives essential perspectives. There's a lot of positives to our profession. However, there can be disparities in the experiences of students in academia, but on placement, and this can impact on success and their professional development. There are also rising reports of mental health issues, socioeconomic hardship, and hidden disabilities that we're having to work through with the students. And really, we recognise that there was a need for an enhanced and more structured, equity-driven approach to how we're supporting students. So we've developed this framework, and there are many different, I suppose, points to it, and just really to share that with everyone here today. So I suppose, first of all, it's really given students the opportunity to share their needs and challenges. So, you know, right from early in the induction into the course, students are given the opportunity to meet with us, to discuss and to share any needs that they're aware of. We're also acknowledging that they may not be aware of those needs at this stage. We felt also that it would be helpful to develop a kind of coding and categorization system to help us identify those needs, you know, recognizing all the different ranges that are there in terms of those challenges. We also then have thought about those mechanisms to support students with disabilities and those additional needs as that they emerge during the course as well. So while they may come in knowing some students, those challenges emerge due to the challenges of higher education. The actual framework in itself, we've been developing, it's been an iterative project, and we will continue to develop, but it's about developing those clear processes for support during placement allocation. So, you know, right from allocating placement, we want to be considering about what those needs might be, and what offers we actually have on the table. We also want to think about that pre-placement preparation, you know, so right from induction, students are hearing about, you know, getting ready for placement and what support is there. And once we've actually allocated the placement, we can begin to be a little bit more tailored in how we actually work with the student for that specific placement. So that pre-placement preparation is really important. We would be providing documented information to our placements, providing very much the words of what our students want to share. And if students don't want to share their actual diagnosis, if that's the circumstance, they can talk about the impact that that might have or is having on their learning. You know, so we have a pre-placement meeting with the student and with practice educators and ourselves, where we, you know, help to just have an open discussion about what those kind of challenges might be, what the impact might be, and it's really a solution focused discussion. We also would be thinking about the implementation of those reasonable adjustments during placement. There'll be regular opportunities for joint support during placement, and then reflection following placement to aid planning and subsequent learning and support. The Navigate framework reflects our commitment to embedding equity and inclusion within our SLT education, but also addressing gaps in the evidence base and trying to build a model that we can inform practice more broadly. We're also moving towards transition to work supportive conversations, recognising that students who do face challenges on the course move into employment, and we want to have a more in-depth understanding of that transition into the workplace. So this will be future work for us. And what this slide shows then is a little bit more about the categorisation framework that we've devised. So in this, we have plotted 20 students that I'm going to be talking about over the next number of slides. Obviously, this is the first time that we're beginning to evaluate this framework. But talking about this categorisation has been quite helpful for us to think about, you know, the different types of challenges that students present with. This first line is talking about formal status. So in this formal status, we consider those students who actually have a formal reasonable adjustment recommendation. So they have been supported with structures within the university, and, you know, there's that recommendation in place. Sometimes that's not the case, and students will have, you know, will be self-reporting this status. At different points, it might be at the beginning or it might be as the course develops. And then there will be those students who have more transitory kind of challenges that are there for one placement, maybe it's due to caring responsibilities or, some health concern, but it's not very much ongoing. Then we think about the type of challenge. So it's been helpful for us to think, is it a learning challenge, a physical challenge, mental health challenge, or a combination? So that's been helpful for us just to think about that and the sort of impact that we can think about then for academic impact, which we're categorising as needing high level, medium, low, through to no additional support, or impact on placement. So this is really where we're getting to in terms of what actual level of support is needed for placement. So we've kind of, for the 20 students that I'm going to speak about, we have plotted them against each of these different categories, along with students and practice educators, allowing us to understand where they might plot on this particular categorisation. I'll continue to talk about the 20 students as we move through now into our evaluation, but this framework really, in terms of what we mean in practice, we've been piloting this framework over the last 2 years. So the categorisation, the actual support in the Navigate framework, we are collecting feedback to evaluate this. This will help us to refine it, will help us to enhance our practice educator training, and then to enhance the student support and learning experience ultimately is really what this is all about. So our evaluation has taken the form of a survey, to evaluate this equity-driven framework involving all of the categorisation and support mechanisms in place. We wanted to evaluate this with students to find out what their experience has been, and also then to evaluate from the perspective of practice educators. So our methods were to develop surveys for both practice educators and then for students. So the questions are quite similar, they mirror each other, but we have a separate survey for each. We had 14 out of the 20 responded to the survey from students, and then we had 15 responses from practice educators. The survey questions were developed based on what literature is available and also from student and practice educator feedback. The survey itself was a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions with 29 questions in place. So I'm just going to now I've selected a couple of the questions that I feel reflect those kind of main markers that we want to evaluate. And I'll also be looking at some of that qualitative feedback as well and what we've learned. So first of all, this is from the practice educator perspective. So we felt that this question was quite important in terms of what was the impact of your students' challenges on their clinical learning on placement. So out of that number, we found that there was 3 rating high impact, most in that medium category, and low, we had 5. Moving on to what level of support did you provide for the student, additional to what one would typically expect for the stage and experience. So that was important just to consider what was maybe in addition. So we had 6 looking for that high level, 5 then medium, and low level were 4, with nobody rating that there was no additional support. So I think it's really important for us to recognise the impact on practice educators, because we need to think about what resources are in place to allow practice educators to fully support students and to find out a little bit more about what is meant by that sort of high level of support. In terms of did you feel supported and balanced in the needs of the student with the wider demands of your service, we found that 4 were saying to a lesser extent, and then we had 8 and 3 sort of to that some and great extent. So again, it's recognising that level of support that practice educators need to feel. What should that look like? What would allow practice educators the resource, space, time in order to fully support students with challenges? In terms of qualitative responses, the key strengths and positives coming out of the practice educator feedback we're finding that there was a strong commitment to inclusion. Educators genuinely wanted and want to help students succeed. They felt that there was effective collaboration. Those early joint meetings between student, university and placement worked well to feel prepared and well supported. They valued that open communication and the regular check-in. Student honesty and that willingness to share really helps for planning. And the peer and coordinator support within NH Trust provided reassurance and shared learning. Areas for development were that they felt that at times it would be helpful if there was earlier and clearer communication of student needs. And again, these are just picking out some of, comments. It's not really all practice educators saying all of these comments. We are a little bit constrained by, I suppose, the real support is provided when we know the allocation of that placement. So we're limited a little bit by how early we can allocate, just with the overall cycle of offers and allocation. But we're going to look at that sort of comment as well. A need for a more formalised adjustment plan to be shared pre-placement. So we're going to be thinking a little bit more about how we can formalise plans and that sharing. A little bit more around awareness training for the framework and practical guidance. So this is very much embedded in our practice educator training. However, not all practice educators are maybe going to training ahead of each placement. So we need to think about how that message is fully reaching everybody. More about protected planning time to implement adjustments effectively. This is really important and probably links to that support aspect that came out of the previous slides. Encouraging student engagement and shared ownership of their support plan, and then improved access to technology. These next few slides are going to look at the student experience and how that was evaluated. So this first question was asking how welcoming and inclusive was their placement. So on the whole, this has been very positive. There's just one outlier. And again, that's reflected here in this particular slide. How well were you supported through your reasonable adjustments? So most are in that to great or some extent. So the qualitative feedback, main positives from our students were that they felt a growth in their own self-advocacy. So we're very much about promoting this with students, that they self-advocate on their placement, and that we're facilitating and empowering them to do that. They felt effective support from Ulster University and placement. There was a development of the reflective mindset, and self-awareness meetings before placement were helpful. And supportive during placement as issues were developing. And also that open communication was helpful. Areas identified for improvement from the students were around that communication of reasonable adjustments, and that's really related to making sure everybody on the placement is fully aware of everything that's been discussed and agreed. There was some information around that inconsistent support and feedback. Our students on a block placement will have a number of different practice educators. So there's something about trying to build consistent support. They reflected on mental health and emotional strain, balancing their challenges and the challenges of placement. Physical and health related barriers were identified. Workload and time management were found to be a real challenge, and trying to juggle that alongside their own personal challenges. And even just the environmental and logistical challenges around placement. Whilst we try to do our best with allocation, we're quite often constrained. So next steps, out of this feedback, and this is really the first time we've fully evaluated this particular aspect of our placement, we have lots of ideas around our improvement projects. Transition to work interviews are going to be a priority moving forward, and we will continue to evaluate our framework. We also want to look at long-term graduate outcomes, cross-institutional validation, cost-benefit analysis, international comparisons, and also technology integration opportunities. We do feel that this is also scalable to other AHPs, and it would be really, really great to just pool lots of different data and work together to look at the bigger picture and agree what that might look like going forward, that sort of national implementation potential. So really just a call to collaborate really with other universities. It would be great if we can, and I know there's lots of great work going on in collaborations. But I want to thank you very much for listening today. And that's my references.
Thank you so much, Orla. What an interesting and in-depth piece of work, and that impact on both sides is so powerful, isn't it, for students and educators? So thank you so much for sharing. Thanks everybody for listening to those 3 great presentations. Please do complete the feedback on the platform and add any further sort of questions and comments to the chat, and hopefully the speakers will be able to respond to those. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon.